Oh my God, we just started.
It's live.
Normally, when I hit the recording button, it doesn't let me because Steven has to give me permission. And so usually I have another like 10 seconds to, but then when I clicked it this time, he had already given me permission. So we're just live now. I'm like a deer in the headlights.
So
Um,
today is going to be a bit off the cuff, right? I think we sat and we brainstormed a little bit some of the things that were on our mind over the past week. Nothing, I think, really pulled ahead on that leaderboard, but we're going to do what we do. Just start hitting record and start talking. Two guys talking shit.
yeah. I don't know. How's your week going so far? What's going on in the world today?
Well, couple things, right? I think we're both preparing for a bit of a a bit of a spiritual retreat. So a lot of my mind and focus has been going on that and all the things that are part and parcel to that, like self care, meditation, abstaining from certain things, and then secondly, have just watched Dune, which we don't have to talk about until later, but I thought it's really cool. Nice, big cultural injection, I think, into the world that we have. And I think Dune is really interesting because it's sci fi. And I think sci fi hasn't really broken mainstream as like cool. Star Wars doesn't really count, I don't think. But yeah, that's what's been going on for me. How about you, man?
Um, Same. I mean, I have the spiritual retreat coming up too with you, and so that does mean abstaining from certain things. So I did sober October this month, and that included it actually wasn't hard to not drink. I think for most people that's what they do sober October for, because I guess alcohol is the mainstream drug of choice, if you will. But I don't like drinking that much in the first place. So that was actually kind of refreshing to have an excuse not to drink. So maybe I'll continue that actually. The part that was hard for me though is I couldn't take Adderall anymore, and that made it hard because uh, it just made it harder to work. Just in general, some days I just wouldn't feel like working, and then normally you take an Adderall, then you feel like working. So, but it's been cool to not take anything of substance for this month. Although I've been drinking like a shit ton of coffee though, and that probably counts as something. But I guess you can't have it all, right?
Yeah.
What's Dune? Can you give me like the 30-second, like I have, when you say the word Dune, I don't even know what it's about. Can you just give me the 30-second, like, hey, Dune is, I don't know, whatever the premise.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is a part of the podcast that's actually can be fun, right? Hack like the whole premise here wasn't always that like we come into a conversation both like ready to go with a bunch of stuff. Sometimes it's like, oh, Hack, what did you find or encounter, and what are your thoughts on it? Even though I don't have any thoughts on it, right? So anyway, you said 30 seconds. So basically, Dune takes place like 10,000 years in the future, and what happened was kind of um, society had this big like revolution and throwdown with the machines, and so even though it's 10,000 years in the future, you have a world that is pretty abject and like not having a lot of technology, even though it's a sci-fi world in which there's spaceships, right? They've like said we can't do computers because the AI took over and like whatever, and so that's what makes it, I think, kind of compelling. It's like kind of a swashbuckling sci-fi show, and because computers are banned, there are these like specific people called navigators who, in order to properly do like warp speed in a spaceship in which they fold space time, they have to take this psychedelic called spice, right? So that allows them to like properly, and so spice also increases your lifespan, and like it's just like a miracle psychedelic, and it's the most important resource in the world because if you don't have it, you can't space travel, right? And space travel is super powerful. And there's this one planet called Arrakis that is where all the spice comes from. And so the show basically, or I'm sorry, the book, it's a 6 series book, right? And they just made the first movie, is about like just the politics and the how do they get spice out of this damn planet? And this planet is like this crazy, desolate sand desert with, like it's like miserable, like no one, so that's basically Dune.
Oh, that sounds cool. Oh, so there's gonna be like a 6 part thing probably.
So they the first movie covered 60% of one book, and there's 6 books. So this would have been a good candidate for something that was more like a TV series, so they could be drawn out. So they are trying to fit a lot in there. I don't think it'll be. It might be a trilogy. Maybe a Lord of the Rings type of thing, but yeah, and this isn't the first time, right? It's been adapted. Like there was a David Lynch film in the past. There's been like other series where they tried to do like a visual storytelling for it. But this is just the latest version, and I think they nailed it. Honestly, I think the director, the team nailed it. So
Yeah, I like when they try to bring stuff back, like certain renditions of stuff. Um, that's
yeah,
cool. I need
so
to
there's
watch that.
this. Yeah, I think it's highly recommended, man. What's funny though, quick comment on that. I do feel though sometimes like there's like too many reboots in Hollywood and what have you, and or adaptations, in that, and then when they do it, it's less about pushing forward the original storyline, and it's more like what are little fan service moments where you watch it and you're like, oh yeah, that's that thing when that happens, and then you feel all good because you got a little bit of a hit from that. And yeah, new Matrix is coming out, and it feels like it might be what I just described, where it's more like throwbacks that 40-year-old, like millennials, right, 30 to 40 with lots of money or with families now are like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
this is a nice break.
I'm actually curious about the Matrix reboot. I wonder if is the Matrix considered a movie that most people have seen, or did you have to grow up in the 90s or something?
Funny enough, I think you had to grow up. We have a younger person on our team, and we roasted them a little bit for not having seen The Matrix, and they finally saw it, and they were like, it was surprisingly campy, which is very true. Like it was
What's
very
campy?
campy.
What's campy mean?
Campy is like, you know, oh gosh, I don't even have the real definition, but campy is usually things that are like costumey, or or overly dramatized, and like it's not very subtle. Like they're wearing sunglasses and they like do all these like really choreographed things, and it's
Yeah, I guess back when it came out, like like that vibe, or like the vibe that was created with that movie was more novel than it is today. Like nowadays, like all the stuff they're doing CGI, like that's like old shit. Um, but I don't know. I would be interested in a Matrix reboot because I think the ideas in that movie pushed into like this day and time can be done with a very strong effect if done correctly. But obviously, it can also be done in a manner where it's just like a cash grab. It's like, hey, look, let's make something where boomers feel not nostalgic and pay money to see it.
yeah,
So, but I think it could be done. It's probably much harder to do than to do it right, I think, than not.
yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, it's funny. I think there's a trope, a name trope for that. It's called the Seinfeld Effect, where if you ask people now to go back and watch Seinfeld, like a lot of people are like, this isn't funny. like this is, this is lame. But people not realizing that Seinfeld broke open that whole genre, and that so much was based off of Seinfeld that it no longer seems original or good. And I think actually for a lot of people who weren't into like weren't naturally gonna like things like Dune, for example. They're like, what the heck? This is just like Star Wars. And it's funny because Dune came out before Star Wars, and George Lucas like directly, explicitly based things off of Dune. He's like, yeah, I'm doing that, like with in that book. So
I always think it's interesting to discover things that introduce you to entire genres that you never would have discovered. Like for instance, Dune as a sci-fi. I mean, like you said, there's not a sci-fi mainstream. I think like even like I was I think and maybe this is not even related. I think in previous podcasts we talked about how like anime is like a medium, not like a genre, for instance. But if you discover one that you like, then you've discovered this entire. It'll be like discovering YouTube for the first time. Like there's a YouTube series for everybody. I mean, because it's unlimited. Like whatever. It's like imagine just discovering that, or discovering like podcasts in general. Just discovering an entire genre to, I guess, explore it is kind of dope. So I'm excited to look into Dune a little bit, just because I don't really follow a lot of sci-fi stuff either. I like mainstream
yeah,
stuff. I know that's kind of against the grain. Some people don't like mainstream things because it's mainstream, but I feel like I would never notice certain things unless they were mainstream.
yeah, yeah. I'm all for that, man. Actually, I argue that I'm so hipster that I like mainstream stuff.
And you have your second level with that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, it's actually interesting to. Side note: I went back and listened to a ton of our podcasts. I know we wanted to retro on it, and the amount of it was painful listening to myself say so many ums and you knows and rights and likes. It was like crazy. So like it's really interesting. There's a live performance where I'm processing and being self-conscious of that. But anyway, back to the topic. What's really cool about Dune too was and I think it's for the sake of storytelling and for the sake of like building a world so big. Like Dune is known for its world building, like the history and the environment Frank Herbert created, the author, was just like ridiculous, right? Just like any fantasy novel goes. But I think what tends to happen with a lot of these fantasy novels is that they make entire races and civilizations really stereotyped. Like it's so obvious, like that's the bad guys that are like bald and Nazi like those are the good heroes who are like, they're like ancient warriors, and then those are like, the elves that are skinny and magical or whatever, like and I don't know. Anyway, that was an interesting side note. That wasn't even my point. My point was actually this. Well, you know how oh, I get okay. Here's my point. Here's my point. So in the story, those societies, they have like a super distinct brand, right? And in America, what is our brand? It's like the American Eagle, red, white, and blue, in football. But what if there was like like your country or nation or culture, like your brand was like technology and science? Like those were the sacred cow, the symbols, and you're like known as like, oh, they're the tech society. I guess maybe South Korea is the closest thing we have to that right now. But like, what if you make technology the thing, right?
There are certain countries that are. There's probably no one to the point where it's like like a sci-fi country. That'd be kind of dope. I guess like certain, like obviously like Silicon Valley and stuff like that, they have like a culture around things like that. um I think like I think when countries like become outliers to anything like that, it's very noticeable. Like you remember when we visited Singapore, and I'm not really sure that if they have anything tech. They seem like like are really into like architecture and like the environment. And I mean, they're probably advanced in their tech and stuff. I'm very ignorant. I don't know why I brought that up. I'm super ignorant to I guess like their culture. But I think when countries become like, because they're probably like 95 percentile on some of the stuff that I listed. But it's very noticeable even to someone as ignorant, like like this ignorant American just visiting as a tourist. I'm like, yo, they're obviously very good at these things. I think that's what is Americans, what's the American brand? Like what are we good at consuming things?
Oh, I mean, Hollywood, a celebrity ship in Hollywood. I mean, even our government is like a reality TV show, right? Our last president was literally a reality TV show star. Um, I mean, if I'm taking the more like optimistic, not idealistic take, I think, American brand is very much. It's not the word conquering, but like, the manifest destiny thing. The like individually, you can like conquer the world and get what you want, and collectively we can kind of do the same. And it's not meant to be in an imperialistic way, even though obviously the reality was that. But American dream, right? I would say, and then the commercialism, obviously, that comes out of that. It feels like
I wonder what the current American dream is. Is it still the same as what it was when it was taught to us growing up?
it's a good question.
Like the house and the white picket fence, and then like 2.2 kids and like the standard nuclear family situation. That's the American dream, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it still is. I think it still is. Um, yeah, especially with the housing market as overheated as it is now.
Do we talk about how about having kids last time?
We're talking about having kids a lot. I don't know if I don't think maybe it wasn't as dedicated last time, but
Yeah, I wonder if it's always interesting to me when I meet couples that don't want to have kids.
yeah,
Not that I'm judging them. It's just kind of like, what you don't want, like, isn't that what you're supposed to do?
yeah. Well, I think what's interesting is, again, ignorant, don't have any stats to back this up, right? But it goes back to your question of the American dream, right? Like, um, I think that 2008 was a big deal. I work in the housing industry now, and I mean that just like made people lose a lot of faith. Actually, you know what? Honestly, let's just start from the post 9/11. I think 9/11. I think we can all agree like the everything changed after that, right? Like the attack on Titan, like everything changed once the Titan attacked, right? Um, and then 2008, like the same generation, our generation, right, who went through 9/11 now is of college age, trying to get a job, trying to be on the path towards home ownership, and it's like, nah, that's a myth. Like, sorry. Which I think then feeds into the growth or the rise in like no child sentiment, right? They're not having kids because like, man, I don't even want to have a mortgage. Like, I want to live out of my van. I want to like be in nature. Like, oh my God, like if I bring a kid, they're just gonna go through what I went through. Like, why would I bring my kid through that? And I think that maybe there's like also a generational gap where we were, everyone like to make fun of the millennials for being like first like, or for being like very like coddled or naive or idealistic. But I mean, but every generation says about the one coming after, right? And I don't know, maybe we bought into that some degree, and we were like, man, like the 90s were great. Like this should have just like trended upward, but it didn't. And so like the gap, the discrepancy between expectation and reality maybe was just like a little bit bigger, even though we're talking about more first world problems now. and not like not getting drafted to the war, right? Can you imagine like, oh yeah, yeah, it sucks you can't afford a home, but also, yeah, everyone over 18 has to go fight in this other country now.
I started listening to the David Goggins book. You know who David Goggins is, right? The Navy SEAL guy
Yeah,
that's like who's gonna carry the boats. Like he's like the he's just like the I guess for the three people that listen to this podcast, I think most of them probably know who David Goggins is. But if they don't, then he's like this Navy SEAL dude that just grew up in a very like rough environment. And he has this book called Can't Hurt Me. It's a really good audio book because he's just telling the story of himself growing up and how he ended up with like his mentality. And he's like the hardest dude on the planet. I think that's probably a very solid 3 word description of him. And a lot of people consider him as that. But he talks about himself growing up, and I'm only like an hour into the audiobook. It's like a 15-hour like audiobook because there's like a lot of commentary he does between the chapters where he kind of like is interviewed about what happened in that chapter. Man, his life growing up just makes it like, you know what I mean? It just makes you kind of be like, man, nobody had it worse than this dude and he still turned out. So um when you're talking about, like the first world problems, that immediately pops into my head because I'm like, okay, well, our problems are not the same problems as some people, especially, obviously this guy's an extreme outlier, but he um found a way to turn his misfortunes, like turn his shit into like something that wasn't shit. So um I don't know. It's a fun read. I mean, not a read. I think it's a fun audiobook. I don't know if I would enjoy reading it as much. Definitely highly recommend. Like 9 out of 10.
yeah, totally. I would recommend. I mean, he has so many like 3 hour podcasts out there too on Rogan and what have you. I think those. I mean, he's really good at just like packaging his whole story and delivering it really fast. And so, if you're a fan of those, the book is even better because he expands on some of the parts that he doesn't get to in the 3 hour pods. Like he does more of his childhood for sure. Yeah, David Goggins. I feel like if there was like an alien Olympics, we would nominate David Goggins to go represent humans in the arena. Like he's just. I mean, he might as well be an alien, honestly. He's really
That,
exceptional guy.
that dude's a different species of human for sure.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, definitely.
I think there's that cliche that comes to mind though. If if I can do it, so can you, kind of thing.
Hmm.
And it's funny because I think he exemplifies that. Like when he explains his life and how bad it wasn't just like the tangibles, right? It wasn't just like, oh, he was like overweight and poor and whatever. It was like when he described his mental state, that was the part where it was like, I think everyone who knew or could relate to just like being your own critic and beating yourself up, that like even your mind is so low. And I think he talks through that so well, like what it's like to be like in a low state of mind, like a low state of being. It's not about just losing like 40 pounds. It's like losing what's here. And he didn't like start off being like, he in his storyline for his childhood, he's not like, oh yeah, I was just a hard kid from the beginning, or like, or even flashes of moments of brilliance. Like, no, he was just a piece of shit. Like in his own
Yeah.
words. Like I'm not even trying to add on. So
Yeah, I'm actually, so I listen, I like listening to things on car rides. Normally I just load up a bunch of podcasts and then I just kind of go through them, as I'm driving. Um, and sometimes I actually get really like, the podcasts are meant to be filler material. But sometimes I stumble on a podcast where I actually look forward to driving. I'm like, yo, I can't wait to know what happens next. And I haven't gotten that feeling in a long time. But this guy's audiobook, after I got through like the first even like the first 20 minutes, I was kind of like, yo, I gotta listen to the rest of this thing. And so I'm actually looking forward to driving because I started his audiobook. So I would highly recommend spending $10 and just playing that in the background while you're driving. It just makes you feel like, yo, man, if this guy can do this shit, then even if you did like 10% of, you know what I mean? Like the hand this guy was dealt and how he played that hand, even if you did 10% of what this guy is claiming, then you would be doing so much. And
Yeah.
I don't know, it's his example as how he lives is in itself its own inspiration in a way. I think autobiographies, I don't know if this is considered an autobiography. I mean, he talks a lot about his life. Effectively, maybe it is, but it's just him kind of like talking about his life. Um, they hit different because it's your the metaphor is the way the person lives, and then that metaphor is the thing that like shines upon you. I think very recently I noticed you made a post on your Instagram about did you read Bruce Lee's autobiography, or was that something that you were into a couple weeks ago?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, can you talk about that? I'm actually obviously a huge fan. I think every Asian kid grew up looking up to Bruce Lee, but I think like having the metaphor of his life like kind of in the back of your head, or having the metaphor of David Goggins' life, or whatever person you look up to. I mean, it's like a very powerful like thing.
Yeah. Oh my God, chills, man. Just because, not because I get a chance to talk about Bruce Lee, but because I think by bringing that up, I think we've just hit a confluence of so many themes that we talk about on this podcast. When I think about, we talk about story, the power of story, and what does it mean to like key in on those stories of people that came before us, right? Like personal stories of key individuals or groups of individuals, and you almost like read my mind. A lot of people started come at me. They're like, oh man, you should read his primary source material on this and the reading, a bunch of stuff, right, on like art and martial arts and philosophy. And I was like, no, actually, where I'm at right now, I'm interested in the story arc of his life. Like Bruce Lee is the subject. Like it's like that was the most compelling part to me to map to, and yeah. So the short of it was, I've always been ambiently interested in Bruce Lee, like you said, like probably like every person, every Asian kid, and had read things here and there, but I really kind of wanted to deep dive and learn more. And I would say I learned a lot. The more interesting part was probably the first half of the book that focused on his childhood. And it's funny to me because Bruce Lee, I realized I really didn't know much about the guy, and that a lot of what I knew was all just cultural perception. Like on the movie screen, like you knew that he was kind of brash, right? And that was like a little bit different than the Asian stereotype, being kind of like agreeable to things. But in real life, like he was just a complete playboy. Like growing up as a kid, I'm 100% sure he had ADHD as a kid, by the way. And again, I know it's really, really, it's a big faux pas to like diagnose, like willy nilly like that. But I'm just going to outright say it. And I say it because, I am constantly working through my own ADHD diagnosis, how to be better at it, right? How to turn it into a gift, how to like work on my strengths. And when I read it, I was like, I did not know that Bruce Lee was like terrible in school, super distracted, couldn't sit in a seat, like always get in trouble, like huge bully, beat kids up, like always talk out of turn, and couldn't focus. Like I think it's an insecurity he actually carried with him all the way through into adulthood, and why he's kind of where he was that like he could not play in the system. Like there was, you know what I mean? He ended up his dad was a famous actor, so he ended up going in acting and dancing and all the physical stuff, right? Philosophical, physical stuff. Like none of the like sit down academic, none of the regular rote stuff. He was a biohacker. Like he took so many supplements, right? And it was funny because I empathize. Like so, I guess to wrap this all up, and if for people that know me well, I think it should be obvious that as I'm saying these things about Bruce Lee, naturally, as I'm hearing his story, I'm like, oh my god, like there's a symmetry here between our two stories. Like, hey, there's another person that's like if you're a person and you're trying to find a blueprint for your life, you're trying to obviously you need to come up with your own blueprint, but doesn't mean that why reinvent the wheel? Why not look around at other people who have your same disposition, have your same circumstances, that have succeeded, right? Like David Goggins, Bruce Lee. Why not try to take what you can, embody the essences of what you can, think about, empathize with them, and be like, man, what were they working through? And this is all to say that Bruce Lee accomplished everything he did and passed away at the age that I am now, 32, right? And so it made me feel like I wanted to kind of honor his story, pull it into me, and then create mine because my story is also going to go to the next person. It's funny. The other day I was driving, and I was thinking about like, man, what if we went back to UVA, VSA, and told like a bunch of these Asian kids, like, hey, you can major in English. Hey, you want to do sports? Like art and athletics are two things that Asians don't like, I don't feel very confidently go into, but it's like, yo, you want to do, and I think that's why flag football is so popular because Asians are finally like cathartic. They're like, oh my god, I could finally play sports. Like, anyway, long diatribe, but thanks for queuing that up. I think it's super powerful to find the stories of famous people and like, doesn't mean that you lose your originality, but you want to build upon that. So
I think that's very powerful. We've definitely talked about the stories that we tell ourselves as the most powerful, one of the most powerful constructs that shapes how we take our actions. But I never really thought about it thoroughly through the lens of finding other people's stories and then pulling that into ourselves. So I wonder if we can go a little deeper there, if possible. I don't have a way to go deeper, but I'll just keep talking around it, and maybe we'll find the rabbit hole. Do you remember when, like, maybe we can talk about people in the culture that created that have created the stories that are worth reading, the stories about themselves that are worth like following their example? Because I mean, you probably remember when Kobe died. That was I mean, that kicked off 2020. That was before all the shit went down. But when Kobe died, it didn't matter who you were or where you were, you knew it. And his life was, he exemplified hard work and not letting anybody tell you no, and just winning through hard work. Like nobody was gonna outwork him. Uh he has like the whole Mamba mentality stuff. And I think a lot of people, especially people that pay attention to basketball, although he did transcend the game, kind of like absorbed that mentality and brought that part of their story into of his story into their own lives. I wonder who else is in our society is worth following like that, who else has a story that's worth knowing. I mean, I knew Kobe's story growing up because I played basketball and I watched basketball. And when the kids, when you shoot a three and it goes in, you say Kobe. Yeah, I used to be Jordan, but then they changed it to Kobe. So there's like a lot of and the Kobe thing was crazy because it was almost so embedded into the background of anybody that played or paid attention to basketball, that you didn't even notice it, how powerful it was until he was gone on some level. the fact that he was gone made it more powerful, made it more like oh shit, he had this effect on everybody. I don't know. Is there anyone else? I mean, I know Kobe, Bruce Lee. Earlier we said David Goggins. I mean, I think we're listing like people that
Conor
are
McGregor definitely hit that. But I mean, he's kind
McGregor.
of he's going crazy. But like, I mean, he's gone crazy. But for like good, he had a golden. Yeah, I mean, he was yeah, just untouchable at one point. And I think ascended. I'm going to use the word ascended, right? And I think where my mind goes when you bring this up is, God, my mind goes a lot of places. Sober October, right? Is that larger than life, right? Mythical characters, almost godlike. And it's interesting because when you look at a lot of the different religions, there are always these like demigod characters that are not fully divine, but just a touch of, and they're still mortal, right? Like the Pharaoh is like God, but not God, right? And like, you know, when you think about Christianity and the whole the Trinity, like Jesus is like God, but not God. He's like man, and there's like a bunch of so many examples of that, and there's also so many examples of different religions having like patron saints or gods or that represent their respective area, and like yeah, I almost feel like Kobe was like a deity, like a god of hard work and like competition. I mean, sports and business, like that might as well be the religion, our religion. So like our gods are going to be mostly things around competition and improvement, like the god, you know, the god of whatever, like David Goggins, the god of grit and whatever. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Celebrity,
It's like the human embodiment of like a certain ideal that we aspire to. And
like
and
Obama.
yeah, Obama's Obama's like one that's like hidden in plain sight too. You know, the first black president. I mean, I guess that's not really in plain sight or hidden in plain sight, but he's like kind of obviously he's mainstream, but like low key in a way because he's not president anymore. But yeah, that guy's definitely like a next level.
No, that's exactly it. Like, no, I think Hidden in Plain Sight is actually perfect, right? Because you imagine the first day he took presidency, right? He probably saw an extremely narrow beam that he had to walk perfectly, and he could have fallen off on either side. Like, it would have been
Mhm.
so easy to fall on either side and just be like, but he was able to walk that perfectly, and even in post presidency, you know, and he gets I think if there's any criticism for Obama was that he was too balanced, like he didn't, you know, he didn't do enough or whatever, but like that's maybe what the first black president should have been, like just like, you know,
Like needed to be to like
yeah, to like
just
soften the
to stay
structure.
yeah to stay in that space. Uh, yeah, who else like Trump? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I mean, I thought so I thought about this earlier when you brought up Kobe and stories and Bruce Lee, but I think that another thematic thing I want to tie into here is, and it's hard for me not my brain to not just even jump here is like the way death plays into our perception of and treatment of these figures, right? Kobe passed away, you know, what have you, Bruce Lee, you know, all young. Um, I think Anthony Bourdain, 100% for food. I mean, he just
Mhm.
showed travel and food in a way that like no, like you know, we've never seen before, and then he passed too as well. Um, and so I think there's like that element of it as for sure.
I wonder if, and to bring it back to like more of a so what. I mean, I think it's dope to know about the people that came before us, the ones that are like legends, that people that we don't know, but we just know the idea of them, and that idea is strong enough to pull us in a direction to be like, hey, that's possible. You know, when you start thinking about like Kobe, like in my head, I was thinking like Stephen Hawking, like he's when he was like 20 or something, he got diagnosed with this thing where it's like he can't, like he's paralyzed basically, and he can't, and so he obviously a lot of people just give up at that point. But then he went along after that to become like the world's greatest like physicist or whatever the fuck he does. And he created his own way to like communicate and talk and stuff like that. And just thinking about those people, like the word legend, the word mythical, that comes to mind. But these are real people. And maybe the so what for me is, well, first of all, who are the people that shape my psyche? The people I don't know, but also the people I do know, the people that there's definitely probably people in our lives that we personally know as like a person that we're like, oh, Steven is A, B, and C. If he can do that, then I can kind of get pulled in that direction too. Or maybe this other person or this other person, my dad is like this. Like I watched him do this growing up. And who are those people for us? But then like who are we influencing ourselves through our daily actions? Like the
Yeah.
story of Hack, who does that influence? And can I do that better? Maybe I can. Maybe like by taking certain actions, it's not just an action for me, but it's an action that trickles down through everybody that like sees me take this action or knows that I did this thing or sees that I'm like this person. Like we don't have to do it on the level of Kobe. Obviously, Kobe wasn't doing this to be Kobe. He was just working hard as shit for at something that he really cared about for the longest time. And then he became a legend because he did that. Like, what are the actions that we take in our lives? Um, I don't know how many questions I just asked, but if you want to answer any of them,
No,
feel
that's
free.
a great. I think that's a great so what, and like I think that those questions are enough to constitute an answer to so what, right? Is to have those questions, I think 100%, right? Who are those people for you, and who are you those like that type of person for? We tend to, yeah. I mean, humans suck at like honestly understanding their circle of influence and locus of control. Like we actually have so much influence in our own little part of the network, like our little space, and yeah, I think that does goes a big way. And another thing that I think is important too is it's like this, right? I think that by excavating and referencing these other lives, it equips you with the tools, the paintbrushes, the paint, if you will, the canvas, to actually maybe now paint your own like ideal person, like state, right? Like you, I think the end goal of all of these is that you should also be guided by your own manifested spirit of what you could be, if you were acting in like alignment with yourself, your true self, right? And manifesting your gifts. Like there should be this like version of you that's just always here that's coaching you. That's like saying, "Hey, come on, Steven, like I know you can do this." And you look up to that Steven and you're just like, "Yeah, all right, I'm going to try this for you." That future self, right? That we talk about. But we also playfully say, "Nah, fuck future Steven. He's gonna have to work off 3 hours sleep tomorrow," like, and then run to the airport. Like, sorry, dude. Yeah. I think visualization, and maybe it comes down to that too, right? And again, if you're not, I think everyone comes in has like different aptitude for like self visualization and future orientedness, and if you can drop into these like celebrity figures, their lives, visualize, then you can start to do it for yourself, right? If it's not that easy. And this is actually where it actually might tie back to the original question I had for you before we started this podcast this morning. Was to me, I say all these things and I think they sound quite agreeable and almost preferential, right? Like to like try to be something better and even have an image of that thing that you want to step into. But how do you do that in a way, especially right if you start to get quote unquote famous and there's like cameras on you, like that then you don't get caught in the ego trap, and you don't get caught in the trappings of identity and all that stuff. It's like such a double-edged sword. But the more you're able to almost play in that dangerous ground, the more impact that you can provide, because you can, like, like for example, everyone likes to joke that all CEOs are sociopaths, right? Obama is probably a sociopath. I don't know, right? But if you could be the one out of 99 that's not a sociopath, then your impact is immeasurable, all right? So
There's a huge rabbit hole here because you brought up ego, and I'm kind of constructing the mind map. Like, actually, I know we haven't we're still prototyping this, so it's not accessible to our listeners. But if you had access to the mind map, which you do, Stephen, you will see that. Oh my God, I'm so bad at this. You can see that we're going pretty far down this rabbit hole, mainly because you brought up the ego. Uh, see here, sorry, I just accidentally deleted this arrow, so I gotta fix it.
maybe that should be our podcast name, Rabbit Hole.
It's definitely a large part of what we do. How do you do it in a way where you don't get caught in the ego trap? I think that's a big question. I Before you asked that question, you said something that I wanted to touch on, because we are talking about a so what, and we're talking. I think you were talking about like understanding the idealized version of yourself so that you have something to aim for, and we oftentimes are like, hey, like future hackers or future Steven, and then we make that fucker like run on 3 hours of sleep. uh I I I think it's very powerful to understand what the idealized version of ourselves is. Like us at our best, what does that look like? What what are our strengths? I mean, obviously we can't be strong at everything, but the things that we're good at, what would that look like if we were at our best? Like some days I'm sure you are at your best. There's probably some days where you're like, I don't know how I'm gonna make it through this day, but then you're just hitting on all cylinders, and then you're just knocking everything out the way you're supposed to, and then you even have time for like dinner with your friends, and you like get to bed on time, and you set yourself up for success, whatever that looks like to you, stuff that you didn't think you can do, but you at your best. I think it's probably very powerful to understand what that is, because if you don't have something that you can aim at, then I mean you're probably never going to hit it. But understanding all the stuff that we just talked about with like the Kobe's and the Obamas, McGregor, and Bruce Lee, all the legend, everything that gets funneled into us. So what does that mean for our own personal idealized version of ourselves, and what does that look like in our day, in our week, and in our lives, basically? So I think having that understanding, like even doubling down on what that looks like, the first step, you have to know what that is for yourself. So when you were talking about that, that's kind of what was going on in my head. And then the second question you asked, and this is where the rabbit hole is okay. So let's say you start visualizing the idealized version of yourself, and you start like even approaching that, taking actionable steps to get there, and then you know you actually start moving in that direction. It's probably very easy to get intoxicated while drinking your own Kool-Aid. Kind of be like, yeah, I'm actually pretty fucking good at this, and obviously there's an ego element involved. Like the ego is kind of like the story of Hack. If I'm like so attached to the story now that it could be hindering, like it doesn't help me anymore, it hurts me. How do you become good at what you do by using the ego and like building this ego so that you can aim at it? Ego being like the story that you tell yourself. That's, I guess I'm gonna define it that way since that's how I'm using it. But then like not get lost in that. And can you even do that? Like, is ego even necessary? to do that. I mean, I think I'm making an assumption here that having that idea is necessary, but is it even necessary? Like is it? I know all the spiritual books talk about dissolution of the ego rather than like reinforcing it. But can ego be used as a tool in a positive manner if you're fully aware that this is a mechanism that you're using for positive gain? I don't think we're gonna be able to answer that question, but uh, but yeah, that's where the rabbit hole is. Sorry, I didn't have an answer. I'm just very uh, I'm very enthralled by the question that you pose in this rabbit hole that we've discovered.
No, I think it's good. I do imagine us standing outside of a literal rabbit hole and you having just like kind of described the rabbit hole. It's like, yeah, let's not go too deep in that one yet. It's a good question, and I think that yeah, it's worth pondering on. I think especially into the week that we're leading up into. Um, we've both been in competitive spaces in their own ways. And I know in fighting, like whether or not, and that's one of the reasons why I want to keep fighting, by the way, because it allows me to actually explore this question. Because I've removed a lot of my ego in fighting, boxing, and losing will do that to you, right? It's a good part. It's part of the experience. Everyone knows that. But like, I haven't been able to step in a ring the day of the fight and not be fully in my ego, like not sharpen myself into a small point, right? And so I'm curious if, yeah, your question, like, can I go through a fight camp? Can I step into that ring what's the maximum egolessness that I can be, and still be, be there? Yeah.
Are you supposed to be egoless? I mean, I know it feels like a binary, like it's like a yes. I'm posing it as a yes or no question, and it's for sure a lot more complex than that. But it's this mechanism of like this self-narrating feature that humans have that allow us to allow it's like a mnemonic device for us to understand how to act in society, in groups, and within ourselves even. Like, do we want to get rid of that mnemonic? Because like a lot of the like that device makes it so easy. I don't have to think twice about how I feel and things like that. It's automated in a way.
Yeah.
But like in a way, like when people talk about ego, is generally bad. So what's the middle way, or what's the optimal use of ego? Like, can you just bring a lot of awareness around it and then use the tool, but understand you're using the tool, and then, or is that another ego trap where you're like, oh yeah, dude, obviously I'm the only person that knows how to use my ego with full awareness. Like these other guys, they're unaware when they're using it.
Oh my god. We got there. We got there. The uncomfortable laugh.
Found
And
the
I've
rabbit
always,
hole.
I've always said, hell, that like, there, I 100%. Like when you get into these types of topics, like people, you go in circles, and I think the answer for me is always just a laugh, like if a cosmic laugh. Like when you get to these types of things, it's like the only way I know how to do it to relieve the tension is to laugh my way out of it, because it's like, you're right. Oh, I'm just the best at using my ego in an egoless way. Like, um, you know, I think there's a mastery there that is achievable. I've heard as much from, I think, from the spiritual gurus that we look up to, and there's that phrase that the mind is a terrible master but a good servant, or whatever, right? Like, yeah, but I do think that I mean, one, you have to have ego because it's natural, right? Like, if you go with that line of thinking, like to not resist your nature, To not let your nature take control of you, because obviously if that happened, I would like never get out of bed, watch TV shows, and eat a bunch of shit, right? Like you can't say like, oh, it's human nature to like just gorge. But it is nature to have that storytelling. I think have that identity, and I think what's interesting is I'm gonna jump to video games here, okay? And I know maybe we'll want to wrap up in a little bit. I'll jump to video games here, but there's this idea in spiritual understanding that the world only exists because we put constraints on it, right? The everything is formless, and it's like by putting form, which is naturally restrictive around things. That's why we have anything that we have, and that's why games are what they are, because it's like, here's a line, you can't cross that line, and if this thing crosses that line, if this ball crosses that line, then it's X amount of points, and if you move this much forward, then you're this much closer to getting those points. Like, these are all restrictions on freedom, right? These are all like artificial things that we put in place in order to create a sense of progress, right? But it's not real progress, because yeah, the game is over and you remember that it's just a bunch of fucking lines on the ground, and we've just like brainwashed ourselves into like performing these actions and caring, for the last 50 minutes. But who's going to be the person that just sits on the side and goes like, oh, you guys are so foolish for playing this stupid game? No, it's like no, you're the foolish one for not playing the game. Come play the game, right? And in the game, I have a position, I have a role, I have something to do, and I know whether or not I'm doing good in that role, right? Because I have this idea in my mind of like, okay, I'm supposed to do it this way, and I can either overperform or underperform on that. And so it's just what makes life fun, to have a thing that you're measured up against and a rule set, and to instantly know, like instant signal, that you're either going towards it or away from it. And that's why we are where we're at, I think, because we've been able to apply rules to ourselves in society, and point to a indeterminate future, right, where we either get what we want or we don't get what we want. And I think maybe the spiritual mastery, is the step right after. It's like, okay, you didn't get what you want or you got what you want. All right, well, how much is that going to turn into like spiritual torture? Or do you just like run it back and just play another game, and you watch, and I think this is where Jordan and Kobe and stuff, I think that's where the mentality comes in, because I watched The Last Dance. Fucking, they drop a championship and Jordan's like, we're like, doesn't matter, like he moves on like that. He's like, nope, next, we're gonna getting to work on the next one, like right away. Like no, like, oh my god, this sucks. It's like shrug, So games, man, games are powerful metaphors. You know
I
what?
was
You play a video game and you like an RPG and you act like a little rat and it gives you like one experience point. Like
yes.
what rule made it so that you get anyway? What I'm saying is there's like a system of there's like a system, there's a currency that comes at you, and only the game is telling you that you're getting something by doing it, right?
Man, we can go down a rabbit hole of games too. Damn, that could have been a whole ass podcast.
We need to do one on games, like games and spirituality.
I like talking about the idea. Like, I think the games you play allow for the metaphors in your life to exist in a way. Like, imagine if you've never played an RPG before. I mean, even though we didn't know it at the time, an RPG is such a dope metaphor. Like, the point of the game of an RPG is to go on a quest and do all this like stuff, the purpose of the game. But then during the bullshit game, you can obviously, go into like a little casino and like gamble and make a bunch of money and go do all these like dumbass side quests and stuff like that. But then the goal at the end of the day is still to like, get to the final boss, whatever the final boss in life is. Or you can get distracted by the like the side quest. And in the very beginning, you're like this weak ass little like like punk that just has like, you know, three little bars of health, and if like one monster slashes you, you're dead. You can only beat up these little 1 point rats, but then if you beat up like 1,000 of them, then all of a sudden your 3 bars becomes 4 bars, and you can punch a little bit harder. And then you just go on your little quest, and then over time, you kind of lose yourself in the game. But then sure enough, like when you go back to the beginning and you see a little rat, you can just like beat up 1,000 of them with like one slash, and you're like, oh my god, I got so much stronger. When did this even happen? And just the idea of understanding that analogy or metaphor, I mean, it's like a really powerful one. That one got injected into our heads when we were, what, I mean, the first time we played an RPG was probably when you were like 6 or something, like maybe Zelda back in the day.
Yeah, but bro, hold on. Okay, action RPGs, you are controlling one character,
Mm-hmm.
but the genre is mostly like you're controlling like 5 characters that you meet along the way and add to your party, and like you have a healer and like warrior, and like you have to combo them. You know what I mean? Oh, you got to heal that one. Like it's so beautiful.
We probably need to wrap this one before we keep going into more rabbit holes. But then
Yeah.
we definitely got to a spot where we were. I mean, this is a rabbit hole that I wouldn't mind living in for a little bit. Um, and that thing you brought up about like when you play like a sport or something, and you're just throwing a ball back and forth, but then someone's like, "Hey, why don't we put like lines here?" And then if you get the ball past the line, you get a point, and then you have to stop me from getting the ball past the line. At the end of the day, you're still, you know, like you're still just throwing the ball back and forth. But now that you have like rules, then stuff gets a little interesting. And I don't know, that metaphor for sports makes sense to me a lot, just because like the rule set is the constraints that make it so that it's important. And I've played sports obviously for a super long time, but if you take the analogy of doing that, but then you layer that on top of like just like life in general, then that becomes like a pretty interesting frame to look at it from. Uh, and what are you gonna do? Sit on the sideline and be like, "Hey, this game's stupid. It's just a game. I'm not gonna play." I guess you could do that, but it's so much more fun to beat people at the game.
Right, right. And then for the more complicated the game, you actually get a role, right? Like, tennis or any of the single sports games, whatever. You're like a tennis player, but like, yeah, in the more complicated games, you're a point guard or a quarterback or whatever. And these are labels, but are they bad? No, it just says this is your job. Like, and this is gives you a frame to maximize and excel within this narrow thing, and that gives you an opportunity at like excellence, right? Narrow, yeah, excellence. So I think again, the so what for that is that like yeah, like ascribing to labels and roles and identities. I am a quarterback. What does that mean? I'm sure you relate, man. I think any quarterback who hears the word quarterback, there's like a flood of like, oh my god, like leadership, snap this, like anyway, but
Yeah,
labels, man.
yeah, labels are dope. All right,
Yeah.
I think we should wrap because I think I could probably talk about this for another hour.
Let's do it.
All right, here I'm gonna turn this off before we find another rabbit hole. uh, Stop recording.